And our final presentation is by David Skinner from Anglia Ruskin, and he's going to, I think, extend this concept into privacy of places, and
yeah.
I think it builds very well on what we've got.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah,
I've tried to explain to a couple of people what I was going to do, and I got a kind of response that said, "Well, good luck with that." So we'll see. I'm really in awe of my co-presenter's ability to talk without notes and keep to time, and I'm a bit worried I'm going to let the side down in both respects, I'm afraid. I'm part of the Code Research Institute, which is based at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, and Code, the idea behind Code is it's an interdisciplinary research institute that brings together people from science and technology, arts and humanities, and the social sciences, and really looking at all aspects of digital culture. So Code stands for Culture Digital Economy. My own background is that I'm a social scientist, and I've got quite a long-running interest in what you might call the sociology and politics and data. So maybe I come at this in a slightly different way than some of the earlier presenters. So there's been a lot of discussion about this notion of privacy. It's an interesting term, privacy, and I suppose one point I'd make about it is to say, perhaps if we think back to, I sort of respectfully disagree about the teenagers. I don't think teenagers don't care about privacy. They have a different notion of privacy, perhaps, to older people. So it's worth thinking, I think, and unpacking a little bit what we're trying to talk about when we talk about privacy. And I think these location-based services are a good example of the way in which digital technologies raise a whole series of questions and hopes and fears about a number of related things. So obviously we're talking about surveillance being watched over, and that can have both positive and negative aspects. There are issues around what you might want to think about as transparency, what should remain secret, what should be made public, and there are also issues about accountability. Who holds my information, how well is it looked after, and so on. So, I mean, just giving you that as a sort of general starting framework. Now, there are lots, as people have already highlighted, there are lots of really interesting privacy issues that relate to information about people's location and about their mobility. And I haven't really got a lot of time to go into that, but just to give you one example of this in practice. So we've already had the Oyster Card mentioned. So last year, the Metropolitan Police requested data on people's movements related to Oyster Cards 6,500 times. So if you're just thinking about that, or if you think about the mobile phone record requests. So this is just slightly random, I apologise, but one police, not an unusual one, South York's police. You can see that, well, this is their last full year of accounts here, 2008-09. They're making over 3,000 requests for information from mobile phone records, and actually spectacularly over budget. So they're also spending a lot of money with the mobile service providers in gaining this information. So, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about, because other people have I think, rehearsed some of those information, or those kind of questions about people's information about where you are and your movements. But more, I wanted to kind of broaden the discussion into a discussion about place. And given especially the rise of services that purport to give people information about places, it might be worth thinking also about the politics of that. And rather, perhaps slightly facetiously, perhaps, or maybe not, to ask, as well as thinking about the privacy rights of an individual citizen or individual consumer, we might want to consider also whether places have rights. Do we have to consider and think about that? And not a particularly scientific way to start, maybe, but I started to think about this and I thought, well, what kind of information already is there out there just on the internet about locality? What kind of information is there? And so I thought, you know, being a solipsistic kind of character, I thought I'd start with my street. And, you know, you just get onto Google and immediately you find out about house prices. You immediately get this information about house prices. Or perhaps you want to go onto Street View. So there's my house. If you go into Google Street View, by good luck, when they were driving by, you can actually see my partner walking into our house. Actually, it's not a very good shot here. If you arrange it, you can actually, because with the front doors open, you can actually see into the house on Google Street View. You can go around. Actually, you can't see it very well here, but you can also see my car number plate on Google Street View. So there are these kind of privacy things. But to be honest, well, as you can tell by the fact that I'm sharing with you, I'm not necessarily maybe thinking this is the key issue. That there might be other kinds of questions we could ask about information and locality. So the kind of search that somebody might make about a locality, again on the internet, kind of typical sort of thing would be to say, okay, what's the local primary school like? So I'd go onto there, and you know, this has become so commonplace. It's almost quite hard to make it strange as a practice. How this has become the stuff, hasn't it, of the delivery of public service now, that you'd go onto that website, you'd have access to a whole series of reports and audits of the primary school. You'd be told about the catchment area and the kind of kids that go to the school. You'd be told, and again, rather like the house price website, which is all about giving values to things, a great preoccupation with valuing things and scoring things and so on. So you'd have that kind of information. Another interesting kind of information here that I can find out about my street is, you know, you've got the Home Office crime map that launched in December. So this provides me with the information that in January this year there was one incident of antisocial behaviour close to my house, and I think this Home Office crime map's worth thinking about a little bit. I mean, what's it for? I mean, it's a successor to something that the police have used for a long time. So where they're mapping crimes and they're making strategic decisions and evaluating strategic decisions on the basis of crime mapping data. But there's something else going on here, which is quite hard to make sense of. What's this for? Is this to allay public fears of crime? Because people overestimate how much crime there is. If you give them all this information, they'll be less scared. Is it to us a tool for evaluating the service we're being given by the police? Is it about devolving risk management to us? You know, we're making decisions about where we go on the basis of this information. Or is this even a kind of tool for us to make a decision about whether we purchase the house? So, you know, you go on the website, you see how much the house values have gone up, you look at how good the local primary school is, and you check how much antisocial behaviour has been recorded in that area. So there's some sort of interesting things here. Now, those of you that are local to Cambridge may remember this news story. So the Home Office crime map launched in December 2010, and perhaps inevitably journalists who were trying to turn this into a good story immediately thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll use the crime map and I'll try and find the worst streets in Britain. So they searched for this, and shock horror, Cambridge, or maybe it's a sort of badge of pride, Cambridge came up with one street, and came up as the 6th most crime and antisocial behaviour ridden street in the country, according to these statistics. So if you know Cambridge, it's Pease Hill, which is that little street at the side of the Guildhall, and so on. And certainly locally, this story made quite a splash. There was a sort of lots of stories with people expressing shock and outrage at this story, and there's an awful lot of what we sociologists call identity work. A lot of reputational management went into explaining how this was a rogue result, and it didn't really say anything about Cambridge. And I suppose what you had in Cambridge as a locality had a lot of sort of reputational assets that it could throw at this problem to say, oh no, this is ridiculous. Of course there isn't a problem with crime in the Cambridge area. So I just sort of using this example to kind of raise these sort of questions about the politics of information about location, and I think this links to another set of issues with the way in which privacy is often discussed, and particularly in relation to location-based services. That I'd argue that they tend to rest on a certain set of assumptions about how people live. They focus on an individual who you might think of as a citizen consumer. This person's able to move pretty freely through their environment. and they're often in a situation of moving through unfamiliar settings. So they need all this information to move through these unfamiliar settings. And once they have information, they're then able to make judgments and choices on the basis of that information. So, and there are lots of people like that, and I suspect most of us in this room would fit into that category. But we have to recognise that actually, if you looked at Cambridge, you looked anywhere else, you'd actually find people have a very unequal access of and experience of mobility. They have quite varied relationships with the places that they live. So you know, there are probably people in Cambridge who really don't move very much. I'm kind of interested in what they put in their location bank in terms of how they moved and wanted to record there. And also they face different kinds of risks in terms of information. So you get, you know, we get these discussions of privacy which are quite sort of hypothetical about what if this happened or what if that happened. But we have to acknowledge that perhaps some people are more at risk of, for example, their civil liberties being infringed by the use of information than other people. And also that people have different opportunities to make choices in response to information. So, you know, some people have the choice about where they live, some people have the choice about what school they go to, but not everybody does. Right, so let's move on. Right, so that's interesting, everyone starts laughing because, right, so other kinds of information that's available. There's a website called Chaff Towns, which you may or may not have come across, which is called What Estate Agents and Local Councillors Don't Want You to Know. And it's largely user-generated content. And if you go onto it, it's actually got hundreds of entries, and lots of comments underneath them, where people describe places as, and brand places as, what are called these kind of chaff towns. And I was sort of looking for example fairly near Cambridge, so I alighted on the entry for Huntington. And they actually start to talk in this about an estate on the edge of Huntington. So here's an edited extract from the entry. This Huntington was once a nice place, a mid-sized market town that 40 years ago had London's overspill deposited on the A1, and into this concentration camped housing estate, and into the concentration camped housing estate known as the Oxmoor. This estate now nestles into the side of the town like a cancer, sucking the life right out of the area. So as you see, you know, it carries on, and actually I edited this. This is an editor, and actually I didn't put the most shocking bits on here because I didn't fancy reading them out, to be honest. But you know, you get the, you know, oh, this town has been absolutely effing ruined by the disease of chavdom. An order to police stop groups congregating in the Market Square hasn't worked. Maybe a 20-foot high wall around the Oxmoor estate would. So, you know, you get this kind of, you know, other kinds of information that are around there. So there is a. How am I doing for time? Oh, great. Okay, so there's a context, a social context to this, which is that over time Britain has become a more unequal society. You know, it's a long-term, particularly since the 1970s, long-term trend. And as part of that process, Britain has also become a much more geographically segregated society, particularly since the 1970s, but actually probably a trend, some people argue, since the 1930s. So this has certain kinds of, so the, what's really happening is that you're getting concentrations of richer and poorer people living together, and much less of people of different incomes living in the same location. So, for example, in Cambridgeshire, County Cambridgeshire, if you looked at the Admirable Cambridge Atlas, if you want to know anything about Cambridge, you would find a council ward where the male life expectancy is under 73, and another one where the life expectancy is over 91. One in 50 adults in Newnham was claiming unemployment benefit in last May, and 1 in 5 in Medworth was. So these big kind of variations between places, and so you this creates the potential, I think, for labelling and for discrimination of various different kinds. So if people are living these sorts of segregated lives, then they have this problem of knowing about other people. They have increasingly problems about knowing what normal is. So, you know, you saw my lovely street that I live in, you know, and we all gather on the street talking about how tough times are, and, you know, we're not going to Waitrose anymore, and, you know, all these kind of things. So you're in your little sort of enclave of people who are like you, who are socially like you, who have a similar kind of incomes, and that kind of distorts your sense of what is normal and your ideas about other people. You have increasing kind of fears about other locations. So there are lots of places where you don't feel comfortable going. So there might be people that might not feel very comfortable going to the Arbory, and there might be other people that live in Arbory who might not feel very comfortable in the Science Park, chicken out about putting the business park up there. We also do know already that there's a problem with so-called postcode discrimination in access to services. So surprise, surprise, if you looked at the Ofsted report of the primary school near me and the Ofsted report on the primary school in Oxmoor, it would be different, but also more directly in terms of you'd have to pay more for your house insurance on the Oxmoor, you'll find it harder to get credit if you live on the Oxmoor, all these kind of issues. And also there's this sort of problem, other kinds of evidence relating to the places being stigmatised. And I suppose the most direct evidence of that would be through people like James Leaf Rowntree Foundation, who've done research that show, for example, people who live in certain places find it harder to get jobs because they're discriminated on the basis of where they live. So maybe it's not so facetious to ask that question about what do places have rights to. So if we're thinking about surveillance, maybe we have to recognise that some places are watched over more than others and in different ways. If we're thinking about transparency, we have to recognise that some places have less control over information about them and less resources to act on that information. And if we're talking about accountability, we could also recognise that we have to recognise that some place, you know, there is this problem or this potential for some places to be what you might call labelled and libelled via the digital. And that's it. I haven't got a big finish. That's it. Okay, thank you.